The family reunion always came with its own weather, a mix of forced smiles, lingering resentments, and the occasional storm. For years, I had navigated these gatherings like a wary sailor, steering clear of unspoken rivalries and half-buried grudges. This year was no different, or so I thought, until I caught my cousin Alex watching me across the room. Alex had always been something of an enigma. 5 years older, he carried himself with a confidence that often felt out of place amidst our bickering relatives. Where most of us were bound by our family's rigid traditions, Alex seemed free, unbothered by the expectations that weighed on the rest of us. I had always admired that about him, even from a distance. This year, the tension was sharper than ever. My parents were barely on speaking terms with Alex's side of the family after a business dispute turned personal. The invisible fault line split the room in two, and everyone seemed content to stay on their side. Everyone, that is, except Alex. When he approached me, I was standing near the kitchen, pretending to be busy with a plate of untouched appetizers. "You look like you're having fun," he said, his voice laced with sarcasm but softened by a warm smile. I laughed, a nervous sound that betrayed how out of place I felt. "You know how it is. Always a good time when the family gets together." His smile widened. "Come on, let's get out of here for a bit." I hesitated, glancing toward the living room where the rest of the family was gathered. But something in his tone made it impossible to refuse. Within minutes, we were outside, walking along the quiet path behind the house. The air was crisp, and the stars were unusually bright. Alex started talking about his work, his travels, and the people he'd met along the way. It felt strange, listening to him share pieces of his life, so openly. Until that moment, I'd thought of him as distant, even aloof. But now I realized he was simply different, a black sheep like me, though for entirely different reasons. "You've grown up a lot," he said suddenly, breaking a brief silence. "You're not the kid I remember." I didn't know how to respond. Compliments weren't common in our family, and his words left me disarmed. "I guess a lot's changed," I said, trying to sound casual. He stopped walking and turned to face me.
"Yeah,
"It has." His gaze lingered for a moment longer than I expected, and for the first time that evening, I felt truly seen. When we returned to the house, the noise and tension greeted us, like an old enemy. But something between us had shifted. As Alex disappeared into the crowd, I found myself wondering what exactly had changed, and where this unexpected connection might lead. The night wasn't over, and for the first time in years, I didn't dread what might come next. In the days that followed, I couldn't stop thinking about that night. Alex's words lingered like an echo, stirring something in me I couldn't quite name. We had always been cordial, but that evening had opened a door I hadn't known existed, a door to understanding, to connection, and perhaps something more dangerous. Alex, it seemed, wasn't content to let that door close. He texted me the next day, a casual message asking if I wanted to grab coffee. It wasn't unusual for cousins to hang out, I told myself, but my pulse quickened all the same. When we met, he was as relaxed as ever, his presence grounding and yet slightly unnerving. "Still surviving the family drama?" he asked with a grin as we sat by the cafe window, the city bustling beyond the glass. "Barely," I replied, laughing. "It feels like everyone's just waiting for the next blow-up." He nodded thoughtfully, stirring his coffee. "Yeah, that's how it's always been. That's why I left for a while. It's suffocating." The weight of his words settled between us. I had always envied his independence, his ability to escape, but hearing it now made me wonder what it had cost him. As the conversation deepened, I realized how much he had seen and experienced in the years we'd spent apart. He spoke of cities he'd explored, people who had inspired him, and lessons he'd learned about finding his own path. His stories painted a picture of a life I had only dreamed of, a life where you weren't defined by your last name or family grudges. "You could do the same, you know," he said, his gaze steady. "You don't have to stay trapped in their expectations." I shook my head, the idea feeling both thrilling and impossible. "It's not that easy. You don't just walk away from this family." "No, you don't," he admitted. "But you can create something for yourself, even within it. You just have to decide what matters to you." His words struck a chord, and for a moment, I saw a version of myself that wasn't burdened by the weight of family loyalty. It was a version I wanted to believe in, but I wasn't sure if I was brave enough to reach for it. Our meetings became more frequent after that. Alex had a way of drawing me out, making me feel understood in a way no one else ever had. He didn't just listen, he saw me, the parts of me I usually kept hidden. But with each conversation, the line between familial bond and something deeper began to blur. His compliments felt more personal, his touch lingering just a second too long. I told myself it was nothing, just the closeness of two people who shared an understanding no one else could. Still, there were moments when his gaze held an intensity that left me breathless, moments that hinted at something neither of us dared to name. And as those moments grew more frequent, so did the questions I wasn't ready to answer. What was happening between us? And what would happen if the family found out? I should have seen it coming. The closeness, the unspoken words, the stolen moments, they were never going to stay hidden. Families like ours thrive on secrets, but they're just as skilled at tearing them apart. The first crack came one evening when my mother's sharp voice called me into the living room. I entered to find her clutching my phone, her expression a mixture of fury and disbelief. She had seen Alex's messages, harmless to anyone else, but filled with a tone and familiarity she instantly recognized as unusual. "What's going on between you and Alex?" she demanded, her voice low but shaking with restrained anger. "Nothing," I lied, the word barely audible. Her eyes narrowed. "Don't insult me. I know what I saw." The conversation spiraled into accusations, warnings, and the repeated reminder that Alex was family, as if I could forget. She painted our bond as something twisted and wrong, her words stabbing at the very foundation of what I had believed was pure and meaningful. By the end, I felt like a stranger in my own home, my chest hollow and aching. The fallout was immediate. My parents, furious and humiliated, spread their version of events to the rest of the family, framing it as a betrayal of tradition, of decency. Overnight, Alex and I became the subject of hushed conversations and pointed stares. When I finally confronted Alex, it wasn't out of anger but desperation. I needed answers, an anchor to steady me as the ground beneath me crumbled. We met in the park under the cover of night, the air heavy with unspoken tension. "They found out," I said, my voice barely steady. He sighed, running a hand through his hair. "I figured they would eventually. We weren't exactly careful." Careful. The word felt like a slap. "Did you even think about what this would do to me? To us?" His eyes darkened with regret, but also something else, something that looked like guilt. "I didn't want this to happen. I didn't know how to stop it." His words stung because they echoed my own thoughts, the ones I hadn't dared to admit. "So, what now? Do we just pretend none of it meant anything?" Alex hesitated, and in that moment, I saw the cracks in the person I had come to trust. "I don't know," he admitted softly. "Maybe that's all we can do." The betrayal wasn't in his words but in his tone, a quiet resignation that told me he had already decided. He wasn't going to fight for us for what we had. He was letting go, and I was being left to pick up the pieces. As I walked away, the weight of everything we'd shared felt unbearable. The bond that had once felt so strong now seemed fragile, a thread that had been cut too soon. But even as my heart shattered, a part of me couldn't let go of the hope that there was still more to our story, something waiting just beyond the horizon. The days after our confrontation blurred into a haze of pain and self-doubt. I avoided family gatherings, ignored the pitying looks from relatives, and silenced my phone every time Alex's name appeared on the screen. Each missed call felt like a wound, but I couldn't bring myself to answer. What was left to say? Weeks passed before I finally agreed to meet him. He suggested a quiet spot by the lake where we'd spent so many evenings talking, a place that had once felt like ours. Now, it was shrouded in uncertainty, the air heavy with the weight of all we hadn't said. Alex was already there when I arrived, sitting on the weathered bench overlooking the water. For a moment, I considered turning back, but something in his posture, defeated yet hopeful, kept me rooted. "I didn't think you'd come," he said softly as I approached. "I almost didn't," I admitted, sitting down beside him. The silence stretched between us, the tension palpable, yet oddly comforting. "I owe you an apology," he began, his voice steady, but tinged with regret.
"For everything."
"For not being honest, for not standing by you when it mattered." His words were unexpected, and for a moment, I didn't know how to respond. "You hurt me," I finally said, my voice trembling. "I trusted you, Alex. And when everything fell apart, I felt like I was standing alone." He nodded, his gaze fixed on the rippling water. "I know. And I hate that I let you down. But you have to believe me. I never wanted this to happen. I didn't know how to handle us." The word lingered in the air, raw and unspoken until now.
Us.
It was both an admission and a farewell, a reminder of what we had shared and what we could never have. "I don't regret what we had," I said, surprising even myself. "But I can't go back to it, either. Not with everything that's happened." Alex turned to face me, his eyes filled with an emotion I couldn't quite name. "I understand," he said quietly. "But I hope you know how much you mean to me." "That hasn't changed." I nodded, a lump rising in my throat.
"You mean a lot to me, too."
"But sometimes, caring about someone isn't enough to make things work." We sat in silence after that, watching the sun dip below the horizon. The orange glow reflected off the water, a beautiful reminder that even endings could have moments of grace. When we finally said goodbye, it wasn't with anger or bitterness, but with a quiet understanding. Alex and I had been two people searching for connection in a world of chaos, and for a time, we had found it in each other. As I walked away from the lake, the ache in my chest remained, but it was lighter now, tempered by the knowledge that I had grown stronger through the pain. The path ahead was uncertain, but for the first time in weeks, I felt ready to face it.